And welcome to Training Tuesday offered by the Chief Procurement Office for General Services. All right. So we're going to go over our Training Tuesday agenda for today. We've got our updates and reminders, and we're going to go over CPO. We're going to go over making a solicitation. I apologize, and where to find additional training opportunities and the Tuesday takeaway. All right, so here's our updates and reminders. CPO Notice 2025.06 SBSA Mid-Year Compliance Plan was issued on February 6, 2025. Section 45-90 of the Procurement Code establishes a goal that not less than 10% of the total amount of state contracts are awarded as contract or subcontract to small businesses. Furthermore, Section 45-90D requires each state agency to file with its chief procurement officer a mid-fiscal year report of its utilization to date for the then current fiscal year. Each agency shall complete and submit its FY25 mid-year compliance plan through the CPOGS's SBR SharePoint by close of business on February 20th, 2025. We also want to encourage you to attend the Bid by Office Hours. Those are every Wednesday. We host these Bid by Office Hours starting at 9 a.m. The office hours are for those that have questions about bid by functionality. If you have a specific question in regards to a procurement you are working on, you will need to take those questions to your APO or SPO. All right, so making of a solicitation. Solicitations are maps of where the starting point is, how to provide a response, what the agency will review, how an award will be made, and the final outcome that the agency needs to get to. As you are building your map, you'll need to consider and include a time frame for responses, contract requirements, mandatories, desirables if you are issuing a request for proposal, pricing, and award structure. Making sure to address each of these will assist you in creating a successful solicitation. So, time frame for responses. Small purchases should provide vendors 3 to 5 business days to respond to the request for a quote. IFBs and RFPs by law have to be published for a minimum of 14 calendar days. If an agency has a complicated procurement, meaning several mandatories, desirables, or requests for mock-ups of the requested supplies or services, then the agency should consider if they would receive better responses or potentially more competition for a greater amount of time was allowed for responding. This is something to discuss with your SPO prior to submitting and bid by for publication. When determining how long vendors should have to respond, you'll also need to consider if a pre-submission conference, sometimes referred to as a site visit, would be beneficial to responding vendors. There are 2 types of conferences, mandatory and optional. Dependent upon what the agency is soliciting will help to identify if one is needed at all, and if so, which type is best suited for this procurement. For either type of conference, make sure that you define where the vendor is to report for the conference, what time, if there are any potential delays they may encounter at your site, for instance, a security stop, if they have to be pre-approved by a background check before coming onto the agency's location, if there is a limit of how many people from a company can attend due to space limitations, or anything else regarding their attendance. Whether you've decided to do an in-person or virtual, mandatory or optional, if you have a pre-submission conference or site visit, you must complete the pre-submission conference sign-in sheet. This is a requirement of CPO Notice 2020.03. Contract requirements. So when do you need the goods or services? Agencies have an active need when they are issuing a small purchase or solicitation. It is generally assumed that the agency needs delivery as soon as possible after the contract is executed. But assumptions are not part of the contract. The agency needs to specify in their solicitation when the supplies or services delivery should be. This may be delivery schedules. For instance, the agency may need delivery of 2,000 widgets the first business day of each quarter. Or it may be a larger project that has milestones that have to be met and accepted throughout the contract term. Additionally, it may be a simple one-time delivery, but has to be completed by a certain date. This can definitely be the case towards the end of a fiscal year, and the agency is assuming that delivery happens by a certain date, or else that fiscal year's funding will not be available for the contract and would have to roll over to the next fiscal year budget. When can the vendor perform work? As important as it is to have the milestone, deliverables, and final delivery date included in the solicitation, it is also important to alert the vendor when they will be able to work. Do you have a high traffic public area where deliveries can't be made during peak times? Are you soliciting for a consultant and you want them to be available during your normal work hours? Will you also have them observe Illinois state holidays? So, where does the vendor have to perform the work? Along with the time frame, you will also need to tell them where they are to be at while they are providing the supplies or services. Can they work remote when providing services? Do they have to be on site at the agency? If so, will they need to pass a background check prior to being permitted on site? Who has the responsibility during performance? It is critical to the success of the contract that the vendor and the agency both have clearly defined responsibilities. Without responsibilities of all parties clearly defined, it can create lags and frustration between the agency and the vendor. In these situations, we often see requests for a change order or scope creep because of the undefined nature of the contract. Mandatories. It's easy to identify a mandatory requirement because these require the vendor to perform that specification. We generally see the language must, shall, or will used to clearly define them as mandatory. If a vendor fails to meet a mandatory requirement, they will be disqualified if it's a small purchase, and they would be deemed non-responsive for a competitive solicitation. It's very important to assure that your mandatories are clearly defined so that your agency can confirm if the vendor meets the mandatory with certainty. It's very important not to be overly restrictive in the mandatory requirements when identifying your mandatory requirements. It's important to ask if you could still use the supplies or services without the mandatory as you currently have listed. For instance, if you're purchasing a vehicle, it would be important for it to have a sun visor. However, differing dimensions or color of the sun visor would not be a reason to not purchase the vehicle. We also see several procurements that are for services. In these specifications, we often see specific titles that the agency needs accompanied by the qualifications of that title. We understand in several cases that the agency would like the resource in that title to have some experience so that they are able to work independently on the project they are being assigned. However, please provide your SPA with supporting justification, such as a published job title that are similar to what the agency is seeking to show that this is standard. Desirables. Desirables are used for requests for proposals. We utilize desirables to prompt the vendor to tell us how they will meet the agency's need. Desirables also use permissive language such as should or may. Although you may really need to see how the vendor will provide a report, but you want to evaluate their ad hoc reporting capabilities, then you would utilize a desirable and ask that they explain and provide examples of their ad hoc reporting capabilities. Overall, desirables will be evaluated based on what was requested, the intended use as defined in the RFP, and the vendor's proposal. Pricing is another element of our solicitation that must be included. Per CPO Notice 2022.08, the agency must use bid buy for vendors to provide pricing. In limited instances, it may be appropriate for an agency to utilize a pricing attachment to collect the vendor's pricing, but this deviation from process would have to be approved by the SPO. When issuing a solicitation, we need to make sure that the pricing is set up in a manner that is consistent with the industry. For instance, if we are asking for pricing to be submitted as a cost per perpetual license fees, but the industry no longer offers perpetual licenses and has moved toward unlimited subscription offerings, the agency is likely to have a failed procurement because the vendors will not be able to provide pricing as requested. Or if a vendor does the pricing, may be extremely cost prohibitive because again, it is not the industry, how the industry typically offers these supplies or services. You will also need to align your pricing so that it matches the solicitation. If you are asking for a new system implementation training and training materials to be provided, and then yearly maintenance of the new system, we would expect to see pricing related to each of these areas. You will also need to assure that the pricing matches the terms of the contract. This means that if you have renewal terms identified in your solicitation, you will need to collect renewal term pricing as well. Whenever you are creating your pricing lines, please make sure to group like items. If you have regions or groups of items that fall under a category like canned good, maybe the overall group, but you have lines for corn, green beans, baked beans, pineapple, pears, and so on, then you would potentially group your dry items, such as rice and noodles. If you don't have groups of these types, you should still consider keeping all of your initial term items together and then renewal lines together and in the same order. Award structure. In the solicitation document, you must clearly define how the award will be made. There are a few different methods that we commonly see. These include award by line item, where each line item will be awarded, award by group or region. As discussed on the last slide, it may be appropriate to split pricing by a group. For instance, get all those canned goods from one vendor. In other instances, it may be the best choice for the agency to award by region of the state. And total cost is where we look at the total cost of all pricing provided. When awarding a small purchase or IFB, we will be awarding to the lowest cost responsive and responsible vendor in any of these pricing scenarios. In RFPs, we generally see total cost used the most frequently. The vendor with the lowest cost receives the most pricing points. However, it does not mean that they will be the awarded vendor. The solicitation must clearly outline how many points are available for technical, commitment to diversity, and pricing, and that the award will be made to the overall highest scoring vendor. We encourage you to take our Procurement Training Academy Specifications course to learn more about effective specifications. The specifications course is also a prerequisite to take our Procurement Methods Invitation for Bid course. Please make sure to visit the CPOGS Training Center for more training opportunities. We'd like to highlight our bid buy trainings. We have our bid buy system on-demand trainings that are available in the CPOGS Training Center website 24/7. We have our weekly bid buy office hours sessions, and those are every Wednesday at 9 a.m. And again, this is a space to bring those general bid buy system questions. And we have the Diversity and Inclusion in Procurement Training per CPO Notice 2025.04. And this is requires that the requesting user have completed the Diversity and Inclusion Procurement Training prior to being able to gain access to bid buy. This is an annual training. Furthermore, we have our CPOGS Procurement Training Academy courses, and we have 4 courses now, and please visit the Training Center for registration and upcoming dates. All right, now let's look at our Tuesday takeaway. So today we have an Illinois historic site, which is located in Henry County. Bishop Hill was the site of a utopian religious community founded in 1846 by Swedish pietist Eric Jansen. Many consider the Jansenist immigration as the beginning of the Swedish America. This site displays an impressive Olaf Kranz collection of art. And the Bishop Hill colony was founded in 1846 by Eric Jansen and his religious followers who were fleeing religious persecution after a conflict with the established Lutheran Church in Sweden. All right, if you have any questions, please send us over to the cpogs.training@illinois.gov email account, and we hope you have a great week. Thanks so much.